Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are doing things a little bit different today. We have two album reviews coming out simultaneously, very different ideas. This is going to be, as far as I can tell, a sort of retro pop with a bit of tartness in it. We'll get into the album description later. It's a bit eclectic. If you're more interested in some prog metal, though, we also have Wilderun's Veil of Imagination out at the same time. You can find it in your feed or on the channel if that interests you more, and you're always welcome to watch both of them if you want to. With all that said, let's look at this description a little bit. We're going to be looking at Will Wood's The Normal album. And it says Will Wood forgoes much of the gravelly, hysterical vocals, high-energy theatricality, heavy guitars, and noisiness that define much of their previous work, and focus on more intricate instrumentals and straight vocals, with Wood at times simply speaking. Much of the album is in a major key and satirically borrows from 80s and 50s retro sounds, but some of the tracks maintain the dark mania of their earlier work. I really don't know what I'm in for here. The gravelly, hysterical vocals sort of remind me of, that would be like whiny emo vocals, right? With harshes. That sounds interesting, but noisy guitars, those are kind of hit and miss for me. It kind of makes me think that the previous work was close to post-hardcore, though, with a little bit of noise influence, and that this is in a very different direction from that, borrowing heavily from 80s and 50s retro sounds. I don't know what to expect here. This sounds like it's all over the place. We're going to kick it off with the very first track, which is called Suburbia Overture. It's the longest one on the album, however it's made up of 3 sections: Greetings from Marybelle Township, Vampire Culture, and Love Me Normally. So I guess let's dive in and figure out what exactly Will Wood is bringing to the table today.
White picket fences, barbed wire and trenches, trick or treat, Merry Christmas, howdy neighbor, thank you Jesus. Oh, what is he building in that painted lady? A participation trophy wife, a blonde, blue-eyed baby. White, hiding wired, the snack cracker popper and Geiger. Camouflage billboards for Leadline, Brooks Brothers, you elbow the jukebox and say
It's good. It's very palatable, beautiful ideas.
It don't look like survival, but by now or die. Suburbia. Myers-Briggs, OKULTRA, takes a village to fake a whole culture. Your ear to the playground, your eye on the ball, your head in the gutter, your brains on the wall. Oh well, homies, where the heart is, you ain't homeless, but you're heartless. It's the same.
Yeah, it's got all the stereotypes.
But you still gotta watch where you pocket sucking me all. Half a life
Saxophone sounds great. The piano line was really well done. The vocals are exceptionally charismatic. Nice little guitar solo underneath the vocalizations. bit of a Queen vibe here. A lot of production on the vocals here. Okay. What in the world am I listening to? Singing along with that line.
Going against the grain and catching splinters. You pull out your rochette like a paint-by-numbers treasure map. You ink upon your jigsaw piece, trace you back to your fingerprints. When all he had is Lord in life, Joe was job, and I guess you'll too die. The Lord looked down and said, hey, you're only mortal. Give it that, take it away, till things come out of sound and rain. Leave you wondering when they might go back to normal. Leave you wondering why they can't have just been normal.
Well, we're already over 10% done with this album. That was phenomenal. Very refreshing in interesting ways. I think it's mostly refreshing because I don't listen to a lot like this, but I do enjoy it. So our opening section is very doo-wop. We have the backup vocals in this one that kind of keep this ba 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 ba, this nice little swaying melody underneath the vocals, which are bouncy and energetic. We have a bunch of staples of the genre, like the guitar solo, saxophone off to the side. Also, the triplet feel. It's a slower 4, but the piano is doing triplet eighth notes. Moving through the chord progression in this manner. It is not just borrowing from the sounds of doo-wop. This is doo-wop what is it called when you mimic something? I can't quite think of the word I want, but emulation. There we go. It's not borrowing. This is emulation. This is straight up using the sound of this genre, of a much older genre, and just replicating it in a high execution. It's done exceptionally well. It's not doing anything new for the sound. We're not taking it in a new direction. The production is modern on it, but it's not like there's an overproduction element to it where it necessarily feels modern. It feels more like a remaster of some lost track. The few lyrics I picked up, though, are certainly modern, looking at ideas and using language that certainly would not have been used at the time. And I think that's the point of it. In fact, even the opening piano rising idea, it moved pretty quick. I'm not sure if it was arpeggiation or not, but it was just a constant move up of pitch. Felt like... I can't think of that song. I Will Survive? I'm pretty sure that's how that song starts too. And the chord progression and, well, for lack of better phrase, the cookie cutter ideas presented out through this track or through the first movement of this track, a lot of it either feels very much in the realm of emulation, and some of it may have been straight up lifted from songs of the time. It could be a smorgasbord of ideas from other songs smashed together to create this collage of doo-wop. In a way that it's just like all the greatest hits of the sound. I'm not 100% sure about that statement, and I'm not going to say that that's what Will has done here, but it does feel like that at times where the song is particularly... it hits nostalgia, but it's also very familiar. And it could just be that it's emulating the sounds, right? It's picking them up and doing it within his own voice, but there's also some parts that just straight up feel like I've heard in other tracks before that, that could be true as well. But of course, the end result of all of this isn't necessarily just to make a new doo-wop track. I think it's to juxtapose the ideas in the lyrics with this vibe and maybe even evoking some of the feelings and thoughts and ideas of the time and seeing how they juxtapose whatever he's singing about. The purpose is to evoke a feeling and an era, not necessarily to reinvent this sound. At least that's my guess. We move into movement 2 though, and we get some macabre jazzy stuff. Now, I don't know why there's such a crossover here, but macabre and jazz fit together so well. And there are parts in here that immediately reminded me of Danny Elfman's soundtrack for Corpse Bride, which features a lot of this as well. The entire underworld is sort of a jazzy type of area. A lot of the music for it is jazzy, but there are some of these more darker sounds, chord progressions, atmospheres paired with the jazz to create this sort of, can we call it dark jazz? I mean, it's kind of a dumb name, but I think it's the best I'm going to come up with right now, and easier to say than macabre jazz, so we're going to stick with dark jazz. It's emulated here, and the idea that the section is called vampire culture lines up with that as well. If we ignore the vocals, which I think are a standout section here, it is a fairly straightforward jazz track that utilizes the same constant rhythmic idea on the piano playing chords. This time it's quarter notes rather than triplet eighth notes. It creates less rhythmic syncopation against the backbeat. But it's the same idea there, and we have these flourishy ideas all over the place. The difference is that we have, well, most of the same instruments, don't we? Piano, electric guitar, drums, bass, saxophone, and vocal. Yeah, I don't think we have any different instruments here. But we have different chord progressions, different keys, and different composition. This one isn't laid back and chill. This one is energetic and driving and syncopated. It's a bit swung in order to get that jazzy feel going on. But above all of this are these gnarly vocals. Just so much grit going on in here. To a point at one section towards the end, I think you could straight up call it a growl. It's no longer a compressed lower clean. I think it's all false chord. There is something sinister about the vocal delivery in this section that stands out pretty heavily against the music, even despite some of the darkness in the atmosphere of what's being created here. The jazziness is light and upbeat, and the vocals are heavy and menacing. It's, again, I think that the schism is the purpose, much like with our first movement. I think the lyrics are going to contrast the feeling and the vibe and the era that the music evokes. It wouldn't surprise me if this is something we see more often in the album, is a division and a contrast between music and, well, between two aspects. In our first movement, I think it's music and lyrics. In our second movement, though, it is vocal delivery and music. But once again, it's a song that I feel like I've heard before. There isn't any moment when I'm like, oh, this is that other song, but there's little ideas, motifs. I mean, chord progressions are fairly universal, but even that feels very familiar. It's a song that is, or it's a movement at least, that isn't trying to reinvent this sound, just simply utilize it for a purpose. And I think if we continue on this idea throughout this album, I'm going to be really impressed at the width and variety that this group is capable of emulating well, because assuming that vampire culture is closer to those gravelly hysterical vocals with heavy guitars and noisiness that defined the previous work, the 50s and jazz and eventually I suppose the 80s sound that we're going to hear in the album is a very big step away from that. I'm curious if I got a personnel list anywhere. Real quick before I hit some lyrics, I think. Yes? Oh, I did miss a couple instruments. Well, this one, let me see if I got a different one. Okay, so on Genius, we have a trumpet player, bari sax, trombone, drums, guitar, and bass. With Will presumably playing everything else. Oh, they call it Dark Cabaret. I can kind of see that. But what is everything else? Will plays piano, keyboard, vocals, ukulele, marimba, and glockenspiel. Though not necessarily on this track alone, that's across the whole album. We have Matt Berger on alto sax, clarinet, flute, and doing some bass vocals. Oh, on that track. That was one of the backup vocals, I think. Vader Boris doing upright bass and bass guitar. Very cool to hear an upright. Mike Bottiglieri on acoustic guitar and electric guitar. Mario Conte on drums and percussion. Richard Cush on trombone. Seamus Roman on bari sax, Robert Schaefer on trumpet, Victoria Godel on viola, and Spencer Daniel on the didgeridoo. Very cool. So we got a nice display of instruments here, and I'm really excited to hear how they get utilized across this. There's a lot of short songs on this album. Yeah, in that case, though, assuming that the Genius one is right, I completely missed the trombone and the trumpet. I didn't hear any brass. But there are a lot of moving parts, which I didn't really get into, but the way that this is written is densely layered. And it's, I think, in part due to the inspirations. Of course, doo-wop is a bit more of a layered style, and jazz can have a lot of layers in it. So emulating those types is going to create a song with a lot of layering and a very densely crafted track, which I think juxtaposes pretty hard with our final movement, which I almost forgot about, called Love Me Normally, which was only like 40 seconds and was very quiet. It lacked the charisma and the personality and all that, and it felt almost introspective. It felt aware of itself and kind of shrunk in on itself, reducing all the bombast and layers in favor of, I think it was a piano or a guitar, and just the vocals. It was subversive to everything we had heard up to that point. I think that's about it. At this point, I'm impressed with what I've heard so far, but I am kind of hoping to understand it better. I think, once again, that the styles on display here are purposeful for theme. But musically, I'm not too involved with it. And I think that's because I kind of want to hear what they write, if that makes sense. This is all very much emulating old stuff, which is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but they seemed, and I think this is where vampire culture kind of stands out for me, is that it feels very them. Whereas Greetings from Marybelle Township just feels like they're emulating another band that I probably would rather listen to. It's probably the lyrics of that movement that are going to be more engaging than anything else. And it may end up that this album as a whole for me is a lyrical album, one where the music is a fine vehicle to transport the themes that are going to be spoken lyrically, and that the lyrics are what I engage with more than anything else. But we'll see how it goes moving forward. This is a good opening musically, but one that quite hasn't hooked me yet. I'm going to take a second to hit some lyrics, and then we're going to figure out what's going on with that. No. And then we're going to move forward to the next track. There is a lot here. I don't mean this in a negative way, but I do think that this album is, let me rephrase that, I haven't heard the album yet. This song specifically is a lyrics first concept. I'm pretty sure the idea, the themes, maybe even the lyrics themselves are written out first, and music was added to it later, which is probably why the music feels so generic. It's specifically going for those sounds, and they didn't want to deviate from it at all because I was accurate. The schism here is between the lyrics and the ideas of the era that are evoked through the music. Doo-wop is 50s, 60s, and I think a little into the 70s as well. We're definitely looking at the height of the nuclear family. The idea of Suburbia, which this is called the Suburbia Overture, so all of this really ties together well. Our first section, Greetings from Marybelle Township, is very much trying to showcase how weird middle-class suburbia is, and how sinister it actually is underneath the surface. The very first thing we hear, other than doo-wop and good morning, verse 1 kicks in, white picket fences, barbed wire, and trenches. The idea that the white picket fences are another way of separating people, much like barbed wire does and trenches do in combat. It's a way to keep people out. It's supposed to be the idyllic idea of middle class living. Nice home with a white picket fence. But it's a way of drawing borders. A lot of what goes on after this point in our first couple of verses before we move into vampire culture is taking these ideas and even just phrases associated with middle class living and kind of putting a bit of a twist on them. The chorus simply states, Suburbia, you're not alone. The lights are on, but no one's home, so welcome home. I believe this is alluding to the idea that Suburbia is a cult. Nobody really thinks about what they're doing, they just sort of do it. The lights are on, but no one's home. And everybody in Suburbia, as in a cult as well, is family. So welcome home. I think that's what they're going for here. As we progress through the song into our second and third verse, we begin to really dig at some more darkness present. It says, so tell me your half-life crisis. I can tell that you know where paradise is, where parasites don't care what your blood type is. Only pheromones and serotonin decide. The idea that there are people who want your blood. And we're going to get into this in vampire culture. The parasites, the vampires, of course, are the rich, the ruling class. Moving into vampire culture, we once again further dig into this darkness, the underbelly of suburban living, and completely subvert it into the idea that these people are just trying to emulate the rich. They can't, of course, because middle class, even or more so specifically today, aren't the rich. Middle class are barely getting by these days. But that it's all about attempting to emulate that culture, the culture of the vampire, the culture of the ones who survive by draining the working class. And once again, we utilize some of the phrases you would typically hear around these ideas, or around suburban living, such as smile and wave, boys, kiss the cook, live, laugh, and love, please pass the pills. Kind of taking some of these phrases you hear often, even more specifically maybe around the kitchen. Maybe maybe there's somebody who hangs up those placards, live, laugh, love, kiss the cook, and stuff like that. And then sneaking in, please pass the pills in there, which I think works well with the alliteration going on. Live, laugh, love, even kiss the cook, both have the k, the heavy K sound at the beginning of those. And eventually gets to a very dark area where it says that you have tried to prove that you're one of these rich people so well that you've killed yourself. Says you put the gun in your mouth and pulled the trigger with your foot just to prove that you've got it. The chorus is blood. Didn't they want your blood? So why are you apologizing for being blue and cold? Yeah, so you killed yourself trying to impress these people. and they got what they wanted out of it. Verse 4 goes real hard and completely obliterates any subtext and just outright says it's only culture, but culture's not your friend. And that takes us to Love Me Normally, which I'm not 100% sure what this is about, other than, well, I think the final two lines, they're repeated, they kind of sum things up. It leaves you wondering when they might go back to normal, or why they can't just be normal. Why do they have to be part of this cult? Why do they have to pretend to be something they're not? Why can't they see how sinister things are under this veneer of simplicity in modern life? It's an interesting track that I think, knowing the lyrics, the transitions between the sections work a lot better. While the doo-wop beginnings are musically very juxtaposed against the jazzier, aggressive vampire culture, lyrically it is a descent throughout. The lyrics continue to get darker and remove a lot of the surface level brightness to reveal the darkness underneath as what is being said, until by the end he's just outright saying it. It's an interesting track, one that I think I want to listen to again with the lyrics pulled up and see how everything works, especially with specific inflections, as the vocals, as I mentioned earlier, kind of what draws me in here. It's the one part that feels, well, I guess in our movement 1, they feel cliche. They feel cookie cutter, just like the rest of the music does. But movement 2, it is the one section that sort of stands out as what the band, specifically Will Wood being the vocalist, is bringing to this track. A lot of the other stuff going on is iterative. It feels very cookie cutter. It is designed specifically for atmosphere more so than anything else. And so I think it's interesting to hear these specific lines being said and how they're being said, how they're being delivered. I don't know that it'll necessarily change my perspective on it, but I do think I would get a little bit more information through that process. Alright, that is not what was supposed to happen. There we go. Very strange. We're going to move on to the next track. None of these are anywhere near as long as that one. And as far as I can tell, all of these are single movement songs from here on out. So let's dive into this next one. It's spelled a little interestingly, but I believe it's supposed to be Second Sight Seer. That was fun. Goodbye. Let's see what's going on with this one. I'll have to fix that later.
Screaming at the top of my lungs in my confession booth. Take away the pillar of salt. Halt, it's not my fault. The devil made me do it, but I also kinda wanted to. I'm cut from a different kind of me. More than you can chew, how to swallow me. Forget positive, I can make a more just kind of more big curiosity. How I can commit to reality with my third eyes open and I like what I see, baby. I may be crazy, but I didn't lose it, no, I set it free. I can't ignore what's under dance floor. More the rhythm of my heart and it has disturbed me, but I still move my feet.
Oh, we got the glockenspiel back there on this one.
Now to roll my boat over the falls and maybe wake up from my dream, yeah. I'm just a psycho, babe, come and go
really fun percussion stuff happening in the background here. A lot of different timbres sort of bouncing around. This dude. Yeah, bringing some of those 80s drum sounds. Love that sax line over on the right. It's such a fun track. Well, I can already tell. The lyrics are going to take me just as long this time as well. Yeah, I mean, this is just a dude who has a lot to say. And not enough time. 45 minutes is not enough time for this dude. He just crams so many words into each track. Musically, though, I mean, this is just fun. I don't know what this reminds me of. I know I have played songs like this in jazz groups before, but I don't know that I would call it jazz. It's a type of pop, and I just don't know what subgenre or even era. I want to place it in the 80s, but it could also be early 90s. But it's just really fun music. And once again, I have a nostalgia for this sound. I'm familiar with a lot of what's going on here. Even if, again, it might actually be all original music, it is very perfectly emulating the sounds and ideas of whatever genre this is, whatever era this is. We have just a really infectious melody line. And then I love the saxophone behind that, just kind of doing these syncopated single pitch ideas. Just a couple of, grouping of 2 notes or 3 notes here and there, and it just creates this really nice flow and groove to what's going on. There's a ton of percussion instruments in this one too, that the different timbres bounce around. They sort of pass the baton on who's keeping up the rhythm, and it bounces around in the mix as well, in the production. But also we get all these different timbres, and you're like beep beep beep, stuff like that. And it's just, it is high energy. Every bit of this, it is designed to push the song forward, to give the listener energy, to make them want to move around. I think it's really difficult not to dance to this in some way, even if it's just a simple head bob. It is too infectious rhythmically and groovy to not do that. And to cap it all off, all of the energy, the speed, the rhythms, the melodies that the band is bringing, we got Will on top of all of that, rapping, just rapid fire delivery of these lines across the verse. And I love the way that he changes up his flow. I mean, this is like rapping 101, right? If you just rap on one rhythm over and over, it could get a bit boring. You gotta change things up if you want to keep it interesting. And Will does that. He kind of treats, from my perspective, he treats the rapping aspect like writing a fast melody where you just don't change the pitch too often. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe he wrote it as a melody with, moving pitches and stuff, and then flattened it all out pitch-wise and just kept the rhythmic component to it. Maybe that's just because I think that's how I would go about doing it, and I might be just unfairly attributing that to his style. But yeah, there's a melodic quality even at the end of the second verse. When his rapping lined up with what the music was doing, he began to hit specific pitches in his vocal delivery there. Still working primarily within the realms of rhythm, but not afraid to inject some melody in there, a minimal amount of melody. I should just say aiming for pitches. And I haven't even touched on the solo, which I completely forgot to talk about Suburbia Overture solo as well. Will plays piano and plays solo piano on both of these tracks and is just a straight up beast. Both tracks focused mostly on high intensity noodling. I would not say either one was intricately paced, but at the same time, I don't think either song where the piano solo came in was really about letting up any of the intensity. I believe the solo came in on Vampire Culture, which was gritty and upbeat and driving, and this entire song is driving and fun and upbeat. So while there could have been moments to kind of back it off a little bit and allow the solo to breathe, it really wasn't the point of either one of these sections where it came in. And so we end up with just blazing fingers on the keys, just absolutely tearing it up. But I think it's really interesting because typically, we've listened to some spicy jazz, jazz piano. Yeah, completely blanking. I know we had Snarky Puppy at one time, and that dude was a disgusting pianist. And then we also had an Asian lady too, and I can't remember her name. Harumi? I don't remember. But the thing is even though they're getting super technical rhythmically and just playing fast, they typically accompany it with interesting, spicy chords. And so even if we have a bit of a static element in the rhythmic delivery, we have a bit of dynamic elements in harmony. When it comes to metal, whenever we hear solos, they tend to be a bit darker in sound. The fact that I'm hearing all of this blazing intensity in what sounds to my ear purely major is different. I'm not going to say I've never heard it before, but I don't hear it very often. And for some reason, it changes things. Bright and energetic and driving and positive is just, it's something. It's something. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if anyone else feels that way too, where like you listen to it and you're like, yeah, this is guitar shred, but it feels different. And I think the major key really has something to do with that. And we really haven't talked about the major key in relation to the themes yet at all. I think in Suburbia Overture it makes sense given that we're supposed to have this veneer of perfection, the illusion of bright, positive, happy vibes, the white picket fence, the nuclear families, that kind of stuff. And it juxtaposes what's actually being said in a very similar manner. Here, I'm interested to get into the lyrics and see where that juxtaposition lies again, because I feel like that is what's going to be going on through a lot of this album. It's called the Normal Album. He couldn't be any more clear about this. The purpose is that the sounds of these songs are supposed to imply something that is the opposition of reality. The song is supposed to be normal. It's supposed to sound normal. And normal for a lot of people is pop music. And across the ages, aside from ballads, has been major key. It's a lot of positivity. It's a lot of good vibes. I think this is what we're going to get a lot of here, where the lyrics are going to be subversive to that sound. Let's hit the lyrics. So this track is metaphorically about living outside the norm. It's done through the lens of being a sightseer or having your third eye open. That kind of idea. Being able to see beyond what everyone else sees, to find a sort of truth. And so our narrator here, our vocalist, our singer, can see the truth behind, once again, it seems, normal life, adjacent to the concept of middle-class suburbia living, but not quite on the same page. And the concept here is that he sees this other side and prefers it. Yeah, people call him weird, people call him abnormal, people call him psycho, but he prefers that to the dream, to going back to not knowing. Interestingly, though, I like the chorus. It says, "I'm just a psycho, babe, come and go out my mind. I didn't lose it, babe, there wasn't much to find." The idea that he didn't lose his mind, there just wasn't much there to begin with. A bit of a jab at himself, while also kind of, in a way, touting himself as better than the rest. I can see the truth through the illusion, but kind of keeps himself grounded too. There's this one line, and I really implore anybody to go check out the lyrics, because there's a lot of individual lines I'm not going to be able to bring up without making this a 10-hour lyrical exploration video. It barely touches on music. But there's a really neat way that Will crafts a line. The way that words, and maybe even more specifically syllables, get played around with, the way that themes are introduced, opened up, expanded upon, and then used to pass on to a new idea. The lyricism is exceptionally strong. Not in the way that some of the more fancy, high vocabulary metal is that we sometimes get a chance to check out, but in a way that understands the rhythms and pulses of everyday speech, while also being able to sneak in a lot of these wolves in sheep's clothing, introducing phrases that, at least to me, are very common. I heard a bunch of this stuff growing up. I alluded to it a little bit on the last track, but there was stuff like keeping your eye on the ball and keeping your ear to the ground. We had live, laugh, love. Just a bunch of stuff that I think is typical in some cultures and areas to hear people say. And to see that sort of language being utilized here as a way to pry open and look past rather than just used on the surface, I think is very cool. But also, once again, how it's utilized in a way that works poetically as well. Just the way that words work and run around each other and bounce off of each other and create neat lines. Where is that one I wanted to bring up? I can't find it. Anyways, the pre-chorus I wanted to touch on real quick. This one line says, "I can't ignore what's under dance floorboards, the rhythm of my heart, a dead as disco beat." Bringing in the idea of the telltale heart into this while also speaking about disco beats and the infectiousness and groove of them. I love how all of this is like intertwined in a single line. It says, "I can't ignore what's under the dance floorboards, but I still move my feet to slip out of this groove. I'm free now to row, row, row my boat over the falls and maybe wake up from but a dream." And of course, given that a lot of this track itself is rapped, there are some sections in here that are just really cool as far as alliterations, interline rhyming, multi-line rhyming, having a rhyme and reusing it several times throughout a stanza, usually in junction with end-of-line rhymes or a second syllable that you tend to rhyme with. I mean, this is stuff on the area of Eminem. Eminem is so good at picking like 3 or 4 sounds and repeating them, getting these rhymes in different combinations in a stanza. Like, this to me is why Eminem is one of the best rappers. I don't know if it's necessarily his technical speed, but when you look at the lyricism, and not just the lyricism, but the way that these words roll off the tongue, the way the rhyme schemes work, the interstanza rhyming, that is what makes him a great lyricist in my mind. And I can see a lot of those ideas here too. Like I said, if lyrical writing, poetic writing is an interest of yours, I highly suggest you go check out these lyrics. There's just too many sections for me to point out, but they are very intricately crafted. What did this song sound? Oh yeah, this was the upbeat jazzy one. Yeah, so the song is energetic. There's a mania to it. There's a non-stop, I can't stop what I'm doing, that's non-stop, always driving forward element to it. And the idea of mania and psychosis, the chorus comes in, "I'm just a psycho." I think a lot of this comes together. Not so much in the frame of I can see the truth beyond the illusion, but in the vocabulary used to create the metaphor for this concept, I think works really well with the music and the drive and energy of it. So let's move on. Oh, I forgot to fix, I meant to fix that when I started the lyrics when I paused. Oh well, one more track with Hilary Hahn's album artwork, I suppose. This next track is called Laplace's Angel. Hurt people? Hurt people. I don't know what that means, so I guess we're just going to dive in and find out. Oh, it fixed itself. Weird. Alright, moving back to that dark cabaret sound from Vampire Culture.
Have you ever died in a nightmare? Woke up surprised you hadn't burned your face. Have you ever
Love the marimba over here. It sounds so good.
Collapsed and threw the planet away. Everyone's just blood in the night street.
We got Aguero over on our right now.
Out in the sun, run your diagnostic test is positive. Nobody diagnostic, but we're still down 911. And now we're singing. It's an on fire and in the not for whom it tones. But with my head up in the clouds, I can't see so much ground. And from here, yeah, I look like a sinner. Wrong, it doesn't take a killer to murder. It only takes a reason to kill. We've all got evidence of innocence, since everything's coincidence. The difference betwixt fate and free will is whether you're singing.
Oh, I love the backup vocals here. Oh, we got a little bit of a Latin flair in here. Yeah, there we go. I don't know why I didn't pick that up earlier. This is a samba, isn't it? So, it's funny now that I know what's going on. I pick up some lines here and there on the lyrics, and I do think we're going to continue with this schism between the lyrical themes and the musical ones, where they do line up on some parallel, but for the most part, the music is going to be fun to listen to, and the lyrics are going to, well, not be. Not in the sense, right? Not in the themes that they're talking about. And so I got to thinking about it, that if I were to be at a festival of some sort and I heard this music coming from a stage, I would 100% go sit down and enjoy myself and have the best time, give them a standing ovation, and walk away thinking I just heard the most delightful music. Because the lyrics are the subversion, and I would not be picking them up on a first listen. And so this would just be, in my mind, a band that plays this beautiful, bright, positive music. And then sometime later, maybe that evening, I go look at lyrics, maybe years down the road, somebody's like, yeah, Will Wood's Normal album is just exceptionally bleak look at modern living. And I'm like, I think I saw that album live, and I remember it being a blast. What do you mean? And that was not a bleak song or sound at all. And yeah, my mind would break at this moment. Momentarily, I would just have such a difficult time reconciling this. And I think the same would happen even outside of like if somebody told me to check out this album and I listened to it casually, I think I'd have that same reaction. I'd come back, man, that was awesome. great, upbeat, positive energy. I could listen to that all day. And I'll be like, but did you check out the lyrics? And I'll be like, what do you mean? Why do you sound so sinister? I don't want to do it now. But yeah, I mean, once again, we just have a really positive, upbeat, jazzy song. This one pulls in some Latin influences, particularly in the rhythmic and harmonic areas, the chord progressions. I mentioned that I think this is a samba. I'm fairly sure on that, but I could be wrong. As usual, let me know in the comments. I'm always down for being educated. Particularly, I think it's interesting that I didn't pick up the Latin elements until the end of our second chorus and certainly into the bridge. I think if I hadn't picked it up then, the piano solo definitely would have keyed me in. But as soon as I picked out the bass line, the drum rhythm, things started to click for me. And certainly bringing the piano to the front during the solo and looking at or being able to hear the harmonic element clear as day solidified it. Which is very cool. I don't know if this one is going to have as much of that specific era and style of music as a way to transport the listener to a sound. As far as my relationship to this sound itself, I don't have that same sort of feeling as I did for the previous two tracks, where I felt that a lot of it was familiar. There are cliches, tropes of the genre that I did pick up in here, like the rhythmic component. But on the overall feeling for this track, it's an original song to me. It doesn't feel like it's made up of pieces I've heard before. And I don't know if that's just because I have less experience. Well, I really don't have a lot of experience with doo-wop either. Really utilizing the core sound of that genre. That's not something I really listen to a lot of. So yeah, I don't know. This one just feels more original to me. And again, I don't think that's a negative. I really think that he's utilizing stereotypical sounds and tropes for a specific effect across the first two tracks. But this is kind of what I was hoping for when I said I want something a bit more original, something that feels like it's from Will Wood and not something that feels like it's been lifted from a bunch of references. That's the word I wanted earlier. Everything feels referential, except for this track. This just feels like it has roots in a style, which is what most music tends to sound like. We got to hear a little bit more of the raspiness going on in here, and I enjoy it. I'm not sure if I want to hear a whole album of it, but I am quite intrigued to check out one of the older two albums that were... Oh, I don't have that quote anymore, do I? I've gone on from that. Mentioned the raspy, dramatic, theatric vocals. I would like to hear more of them. I think they're done well in this album so far, to reserve them for key moments to kind of give them a little bit of extra bite, and I think having them in Vampire Culture was really great, given that it's supposed to be presumably from a side of somebody who felt no remorse, no loss from these people who were killing themselves in order to appease the vampire culture that they're trying to emulate, while also underlining the animosity and destruction of the vampire culture. I think it worked really well there to keep it isolated there. But as far as this album goes, to introduce that bite every once in a while, to give certain words or syllables a little bit of extra oomph, a little bit of extra, some teeth to bear. We had some more instruments on this one. I appreciate the ever-expanding that's a word. The ever-expanding timbre of the auxiliary percussion section. It felt like we had some hand drums last time around. Was that Second Sight Seer? And this one we have the guero that pops up over in the right channel for a little bit of the second verse, I think that was. And we had the beautiful marimba pop in here. For those who don't know, marimba is sort of like a glockenspiel, but instead of metal bars, it's wooden bars. So they just have this beautiful warmth to them, while still getting a bit of that typical bell sound that you would expect. They just sound gorgeous. I think the marimba is probably, oh man, probably the most beautiful instrument I've played. And I say that as a very devout trumpet player who always talks up the trumpet as being the best at everything. But I think the marimba is just gorgeous. Love playing that instrument, just sounds great all the time. And I love hearing it in songs too. So I love the timbre, the character that it brings to this track. It gives it a bit more of a warm, earthy tone that the rest of the tracks haven't had so far. We had some extensive lower, was it trombone? Might have been the bari sax, I don't know. It's kind of weird, I'm getting them confused, but I could not tell in the moment. Behind the vocals, we had a nice background vocal section, like a little choir back there. In the chorus, I mean, it's kind of weird. The more that I talk about these tracks, the more that my highlights and what I want to point out are all the same. It's interesting how many styles of music you can make with doing the same thing over and over and over. Energetic vocals, harmonizing choirs in the background, layers upon layers upon layers of guitar, bass, piano, and it's usually a saxophone or something, and then some ornamental stuff on top. That's kind of how all these songs have been made so far. You just change up the harmonic element and the rhythmic element, and you create different sounds. Huh. It's deceptively varied. When musically it really isn't. The core building blocks of the composition. When we listen to rock and metal, they don't really change up the sound of things, especially if they're just a four-piece band and every instrument does the same thing every track, and they change up the riffs. It's very on the surface that they're doing the same thing in every song. But this was kind of deceptive. The difference between Second Sight Seer and Laplace's Angel is really key, and a few timbre changes, but sort of how they build each section is very rhythm and melody and stuff like that, but how they build each section is very similar. The roles that instruments have are very similar. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't pick up on that till now. I mean, it's not a negative at all, just something I wasn't expecting to discover. I'm gonna hit some lyrics here, I think. Anything else? Yeah, I'm gonna hit some lyrics here and we'll move on. This track is carrying a lot on its shoulders. It is about both the concept of free will, if we as humans have it, and if my actions of the past make me a bad person. Or more specifically, in the case of our narrator, if I've done bad stuff in the past, does that make me a bad person today? And if free will doesn't exist, was I ever bad? It wasn't my decision then. It is a lot. It is a lot for anything to write about and talk about. It is certainly a lot for a 4-minute song. I think it does an okay job at presenting these concepts and not really diving into any answers, because there really isn't any. A couple of lines I do want to point out. At the beginning of verse 2, we're only tuning to the tone of the bell curve now. Ask not for whom it tolls, but with my head up in the clouds, I can see so much ground. From up here, you look like ants in a row. I really like the idea, the similar sounding of tuning and tone back to back. Tuning to the tone of a bell, but then transitioning that into a bell curve and asking again, ask not for whom it tolls, referring back to the idea of the bell. Just a really great line there. I love the flow of this. It says it doesn't take a killer to murder, it only takes a reason to kill. We've all got evidence of innocence, it's everything's coincidence. The difference twixt fate and free will is whether you're singing. It is a loaded section as far as meaning, but it also flows so well. It's fun to say. And I think that's one of the cool things that I'm beginning to dig in Will's writing, is that there are things that are just fun to say. Even if I don't know what exactly the meaning is or what all the interlinking references are, it still sounds cool. Now the chorus comes in and says, could you take a look at me? Am I bad? Am I really that bad? Well, whatever you think of me, if you were in my shoes, you'd walk the same miles I do. You would do the exact same things if you were in my position. Who are you to judge me? And I think that's why I like, as we close out in our final choruses and our bridge. The bridge says, the only ones in need of love are those who don't receive enough, so evil ones should get a little more. The idea that, even coming from the subtitle here of the song, which is Hurt People? Hurt People. It's a play on the term hurt people hurt people. Those who are already hurt are more likely to hurt others. It's the cycle of abuse. And right here in the bridge, he says that people who don't receive enough love need more than those who do. Not necessarily in a way that says we should take love away from other people to give to them, but we need to be able to recognize people who are hurt and reach out to them. It is the only way to stop the cycle of abuse. If people have done bad stuff in their past, it's sometimes, yeah, they're just bad people, but I think what he's kind of getting at here is that most people are just a product of their circumstances. This is 100% looking at nurture over nature. You're a product of your environment, and you do what you know or what you're forced to do because of your situation. We could avoid a lot of negativity and pain in life if we just reach out and help those who have it a little worse. And so when the chorus comes back in, the first time, okay, so here's something I didn't talk about. The chorus has backup vocals that sing something completely different from what Will is saying. The first time, though, they just say that everything is just stuff. It's just matter. It says, he says, could you take a look at me? Am I really that bad? Well, whatever you think, if you were in my shoes, you'd do the same. The backup vocals say, well, it's the norm for animals. It's the norm for chemicals. It's the norm for particles, I for tooth. It's only natural. Everything I've done is natural because it is what makes me up. The idea of free will versus determinism. I am a product of my environment, but I am also the chemicals and matter that make me me. My brain works the way it does because of how it is created. Which is the idea that if you were me, you'd do the same thing, because you wouldn't be me. You wouldn't be you in my body, you would be me, the way that I'm made. But then we take a different look at it and say, well, what if it's not nurture? Or sorry, what if it's not nature? What if it's nurture? What if it's not how we're made, but what makes us? And so again, chorus 2 says, could you take a look at me? Am I really that bad? Whatever you think, if you were in my shoes, you'd do the same. But the backup vocals say you could break an angel's fall and ignore the devil's call. Still forsaken shoulders fall silent knell. It's no more than cultural, you and me inseparable. It's a small hell after all. The idea that an angel's fall would be if they screwed up and it's their exile from heaven, much like Lucifer. I was good at one point, and now I'm not. I am falling. You could help break my fall. You could ignore the intent to judge me and instead help me. And that would make my life better. If you helped someone out, just reach out an arm, save someone. If you don't, though, and if your shoulders shall fall silent, then it becomes a cultural event, and you and me are now inseparable in this small hell. I don't know if Will is necessarily saying that people not helping other people places the blame on them, but as a culture, as a group of people, we help create the negativity in our world by not reaching out and helping. And again, I don't think he's saying that we could completely eradicate evil in general, but we could help remove some of the negativity, some of the slightly bad due to people's circumstances or upbringings or any of that. That nature and nurture have an impact in why people do things that aren't great. And that as a society, as a culture, as a people, we should be helping each other out in ways so that the nurture aspect helps create better people, or helps create people who aren't put in positions where they have to do bad stuff, where they could be judged. I really like this song. And, like I've already mentioned, the lyrics are a lot heavier than the song would imply. I'm glad I'm going through the lyrics on this, even if I'm not entirely sure my read on every track is going to be as strong as it was on this one. There are annotations on every single line for all of the songs we've checked out so far, and I'm going to assume the same moving forward. This is probably going to be about a 2.5, 3 hour video for you all, but it's easily going to be 5 hours of work for me as I'm reading all of this. So I hope you appreciate all this work I'm putting into this one. Usually it's my own interpretation of the lines because there's usually not annotations for a lot of the more extreme metal stuff. But this is very well documented stuff. And again, if you're interested in any of this, go check it out, especially on Genius, where each line is annotated. And there's probably a lot of interlinking stuff in here that I'm not going to bring up because it's too minute for what I'm trying to get at in the analysis, which is mostly that I'm trying to get the themes of the lyrics to tie back to the music. So with that said, let's dive into our next track. This one is called I, Me, Myself. I'm back to the doo-wop, but distorted.
Another way to fit back in my skin. Flower petals and feathers tether me to the ground. Take my tea with formaldehyde for my feminine side since the day that I died. While I wait on my bones until I'm brittle, am I pretty now? For some reason I find my And now you got me thinking, I wish I could be a girl in that way. You wish I could be your girlfriend, boyfriend. Am I pretty enough to lie to? Oh, I wish I
This sound is so familiar, and I wish I could place it.
be your girlfriend, boyfriend. Just a little on me in a big, big world. Little on me in a big world.
The synthesizer has me thinking of chiptune.
I've been feeling lighthearted since I gained enough weight back to cover my bones. I get dressed up in shadows one leg at a time.
I love how the noise rock element just pokes through sometimes. Like, it's like the mask is starting to break, and I think I like that imagery. That sultry sax.
And now you got me thinking, I wish I could be a girl in that way. You wish I could be your girlfriend, boyfriend. Am I pretty enough to lie to? I wish I could be a girl in that way. You wish I could be your girlfriend, boyfriend. Just a little of me in a big.
You know, it kind of reminds me of Danger Days era of My Chem, but instead of in a rock band, I don't know what this would be, but it's not like the traditional rock sound that they utilized. I mean, this is.
Pathetic, meet your anesthetic criteria, pathetic, seeing you become ascetic, say my name like a slur, but I've been going worse and I heard it all before, no this isn't a first, let me be the void you fill with, taxidermy fingerprints, taxonomize the differences, I am quantum physics, my witness brings me into existence, I wish I could be a girl, that way you wish I could be your girlfriend, boyfriend, am I pretty enough?
Technical error. But you know, for a split second, I wouldn't have put it past them to just have a stop in there. But yeah, the song hit a buffering point, I suppose, weirdly enough. So this is freaking emo. And I don't know why it took me so long to realize. Between the harsh, theatric, hysterical vocal style that we have in vulture culture. Vampire culture. Vulture culture. And even dipping into that hysterical vocal style every once in a while throughout songs, to the way that he crafts melodies for himself, for the vocals over the top of the music. this is emo in so many ways. This is like what if emo, but they use jazz instruments, a jazz foundation. And the more that I think about it from that angle, I'm like, yep, things start to make sense. If you have a second, or if you have a very clear idea of this song, specifically the vocal work in it, I want to ask a question here. Because I brought up Danger Days, Mike M's fourth album. And I want you to ask yourself a serious question. If Gerard Way sang this song, how different would it be? And at least my answer to that is not very. And that's the beginning of my solidification that this is emo jazz. And I think that's why it's clicking with me so well. But even like, harmonically, obviously, we have a lot of doo-wop, we have a lot of jazz, we had Latin vibes in our last one. Harmonically, it's all over the place, but melody. How are melody lines crafted? How are the vocals delivered? These two elements kind of give all these songs a connective emo tissue. And I think that's kind of cool. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way as me on that one. But it really makes me want to check out the other two albums now. Yeah, I'm going to pull this off to the side regardless. I need to check out more of Will Wood, whether I go into his newer stuff or his older stuff. I just got to listen to more of this dude. For this song in particular, it is built in a way that's sort of like the rest of them. We have these very catchy, charismatic vocals on top of layers of harmony and melody and ornamental ideas that sound very jazz rock. Jazz rock's a hard one for me to quantify. I have played quite a few tracks in jazz settings where at the top of the page in the genre it would be like, swing, blues, samba, whatever. It says rock. There is a subset of jazz or a rockish sound that I relate to jazz. I don't know if it's really called jazz rock, but that's what this feels like to me, is that idea right there. I gotta find some jazz rock. See if I can remember any of the stuff that I've played in the past, so I can showcase it. I mean, it was all big band stuff, so it still sounded like jazz big band, but had a bit more bite to it, I suppose, like an electric bluesy jazz. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm getting here, though. And I just dig the jazzy element that sits underneath all of this, because this is, I would never classify this as a jazz album, I don't think, but it's undeniable that jazz is a strong component of everything we've listened to thus far. Although I don't understand the doo-wop intro on this one. We got away from it real quick. It's got to be thematic, right? The idea that we start in it for 30 seconds and then move into something totally different. Oh, there was one instrumental thing I really liked. I don't remember what it was. It was a guitar and piano. Sax and piano? Yep. We had a sax over here to the right, sort of doing something a bit more melodic. It was a 4-bar phrase, but it was a riff. in actuality. And we had the piano over here soloing, and the two of them just worked really well together. I love it. Um, and the one thing that we need to talk about, we'll just skip into it. I don't know where I was going with that, anyways. The breaking through, the cracking of the mask. So much of the verse of this track is presenting the concept of normality, if we want to call it that, and the noise rock sound breaking through, which to me is whatever. Maybe it's the darkness that sits under society. Maybe it's the darkness of our character sitting, or, trying to break through their attempt to present themselves something different. I don't think any of these songs are linked together in a narrative way, but I do think that there is a concept that ties everything together so far in a way that I would call this a concept album, even if it's not done in a way that most people think of, which is every song coming together to tell a story. And we just got done listening to a track that said, I've done bad things in my past, but does that make me a bad person today? And it could be that this person is wearing a mask, presenting themselves as someone who is normal within society, but these darker urges or their past even could be trying to break through. It's cracking the mask. I really like this because it presents itself both on that visual element of a mask breaking, but also if we think about this musically, assuming that both of the older tracks or albums that Willwood has created based on that description I read are more like Vampire Culture, but with noise rock rather than jazz, and it's more antagonistic music, that this is his older music trying to break free and come out while he tries to put on this mask of normality so that people hypothetically would like the music, right? The idea that he's turned over a new leaf, but the past is still haunting him. That kind of vibe is what I'm getting out of the music. And I think it's so cool to change your sound so dramatically and find ways to sneak your old sound in while allowing it to work within the themes you're exploring lyrically as well. It works on so many levels. This dude is something else. Does Will write everything? Does he have co-composers or anything? It's written by, vocals by, both for Will Wood. At least for this track. Just though, everything is just on another level here. Yeah, I really enjoy that visual that the music brought out there in the verse. And we're talking a lot about normalcy, normalcy on this album, and fitting in and not fitting in. And I really like that it's being presented through the music here, because so far the music has mostly been nostalgia based, reminiscent based. We bring the doo-wop in to present music of a time when the nuclear family and picket fences were very standard, right? It's one of the first things it's one of the first things I think of when that music comes up. And to create that image and tie it with the music and then subvert it lyrically is why that works together. But here we kind of go in a different direction. Instead of looking at music from the past, he incorporates music of his past. It's so good. So good. I'm going to some lyrics here. We'll keep rocking. Alright, this track is very clearly speaking about gender identity and trying to figure out who you are. Verse 1 is interesting in that it seems to, from my perspective, be speaking about addressing more of a feminine side of the person, whereas verse 2 addresses being more of the masculine side, with the chorus wishing that, well, as it states, I wish I could be a girl. And that way you'd wish I could be your girlfriend, boyfriend. It says, am I pretty enough to lie to? I think, which is supposed to be a line about passing. And it says, oh, it's just little old me in a big, big world. I wish I were a girl. What's interesting is I noticed later on in our final chorus, things get twisted around a little bit. Instead of saying, am I pretty enough to lie to, it says, am I pretty enough to love back? No, not yet. Am I pretty enough to die in the little old me in the big world? I'm not quite sure what these lines are supposed to be getting at. Am I pretty enough for these bad things to happen to me? But I think the general idea is, do I pass enough for you to treat me like a woman? And I think that might be a bit of a stretch, but there is one line in verse 2 where he speaks about feeling lighthearted since I've gained enough weight back to cover up my bones, which is a reference back to the first one where he says that he's lost enough weight to fit back into his skin. And I think this is a bit about trying to figure out where you're at. Do you feel like a woman? Do you feel like a man? And it's more about addressing the feminine and masculine sides of this person. But at one point says, it's been a point of contention between myself and this body that they stuck me in, the privilege of being born to be a man. I think, which brings up gender politics in general. You know, the fact that for the most part, men are treated better in most societies than women. He has the privilege of living in a man's world as a man and chooses not to. That idea is already brought up, which is why I think the line, am I pretty enough to lie to, or am I pretty enough to die, is asking, am I pretty enough to be treated like a woman, to be treated as secondary to a man? The bridge, I'm not 100% sure what it means, but I love these lines. It says, eating your prosthetic, meet your anesthetic, criteria pathetic, seeing you become ascetic. It's just one of those parts that is so good. And of course, we have the double meanings here. It says, eating your prosthetic meat, but meat is also used to begin the next line, meet your anesthetic criteria. It says, pathetic, seeing you become ascetic. But it also could be pathetic seeing you be copacetic. It's just done very well. I think that's going to be my big thing by the end of this album, is just really loving the wordplay and the way that things roll off the tongue. The outro, though, poses a very interesting question. It says, all identities are equally invalid. Don't you think that there's a chance that you could live without it? And it's repeated over and over and over. And I think it's interesting. Verse 1 was like, let me express some of my feminine side. He says, give me flower petals. Give me tea. Watch me while I whittle my bones until I'm brittle. Am I pretty now? Verse 2 says, I put on some more weight. I get dressed up in shadows, one leg at a time. To me, it feels more of the masculine side. And I think it's a point that, especially with the chorus, I wish I could be a girl. That this could be taken in a very trans perspective. But by the end, he kind of doesn't care about labels. anymore. He's like, who cares if I'm more feminine or if I'm more masculine or if I want to be a girl or if I'm happy in my body? Why does it matter what identity I tie to that, the word I use to describe myself? None of them fit me. He says they're all equally invalid. They're too general. They don't fit my specific experience. My identity is Will Wood. Says, I wonder if there's a chance that we can live without putting these labels on things. And see, if we go back to the music, I was talking about there being a mask and the noise breaking through the normality of the music. And I had likened it to some of the topics we have been talking about in the past couple of tracks, but I mean, obviously this is a gender identity song, and the truth breaking through your presentation fits really well with being trans or not knowing what you are, not having a good name for it, but still acting in ways that people don't accept as normal. If you look like a man, you'll be chastised for acting feminine, which is acting outside of the norm, which is what the whole album has been about. See, while I was reading this, I was like, this is a nice song. I don't have anything against the song, but it's the first time we've sort of deviated from the themes we've been talking about, but we haven't. We aren't. This is still about a song, this is still a song about someone who sees the norm and feels that they don't fit within it. But I think what's interesting too is that they don't see themselves in the general trans culture either. At least that's not what the outro tells me, and that they feel like an outsider to the outsider group as well. And so at the end, they're like, I don't want any labels. I'm just me. Can we do that? Can I just live like that? And I think it's interesting too, because according to Will, he left a message for his fans here. He said he was beginning to get harassed because some of his fans thought this was a transphobic song. And it's interesting that, to me, the outro is sort of like, I don't fit in with the normal people, you know, the way that society expects right now. I don't fit in with the trans culture and society there. I don't really feel like I fit in anywhere. And then to still get attacked, I think that sucks. Especially since the chorus, I mean, he's really putting himself out here. Saying, you know, this is my experience with gender identity. He's being very vulnerable. Getting attacked by fans for that. But that's outside of the scope of the song. So I'm not going to dig too much into that. But I do think that sucks quite a bit. Alright, we're going to move forward. Can't believe we're already 2 hours into this and only halfway through the album. Not even halfway, we're just getting into it. Let's dive into the next track called, well, Better Than the Alternative.
Pink lemonade on autumn bomber coats, Peter Pan collars, but my daughter's growing up. She's gonna be a lot like me, but I don't wanna be at all like me. Oh, yellow buzz cuts, pulling out stingers. You're telling me I'm holding up 11 fingers, and stranger things than death can happen to lab rat girls and pretty white rabbits. But everybody knows that, nobody knows that, everybody's in on everybody's business. This isn't my first Christmas, I know mistletoe when I see it. Baby, could you play along?
playing around with a lot of the music motifs we have seen in the opening track here.
Find out what's wrong with me. Could you tell me how? Could you tell me how? And if I'm still pretty.
That is chiptune though. That's the second time I've heard chiptune sounds on the album.
Cigarette burns, laugh lines, wide dimples. If they could see the future back when times were simple, would they kiss your cheek or yank the bandage off, let you speak, or take advantage of how if everyone's sick, well then nobody can catch it, and if everybody's different, how could anybody match? And we're looking through the pockets of the hand-me-downs we laid out, wondering if we'll fit into the yesterdays we played out. Everybody knows that, nobody knows that, everybody's all up in my goddamn business.
The vocals are very concerned about stuff, and the music is in bliss. Getting some beachy vibes on this one.
Warmer tears than you've grown used to since then. A toast to the nosebleed seats and the big dream sequence where you're found guilty of your innocence, gently sent right back to bed. Everybody knows that, nobody knows that, everybody's all up in my motherfucking business. This isn't my first.
I like how that line has gotten more and more aggressive every time he repeats it.
Nobody knows that everybody's in on everybody's business. This isn't my first lyric. I know exactly how I should finish it. Baby, could you play along with me? Baby, would that be alright with you? And when we find out what's wrong with me, could you tell me how I'm right for you? Baby, could you play along with me? Baby, would that be alright with you? After all of that's been done to me, could you tell me how? Could you tell me how? Could you tell me what's so wrong about what's wrong with me? I'm just trying to do what's right by you. What's so wrong about what's wrong with me? Oh, I'm just trying to do what's right by you. Baby, could you play along with me? Baby, would that be alright with you? After all of that's been done.
So that whole song was escalation until the end here. We drop it back down. I love the
Did you know
random voices going on, almost like
come from the outside?
gossip, people gossiping.
From the core and out to the skin, and that's why you'll never find the worm in it. But a few bad ones won't spoil the eyes if they fall far enough from the tree. Rind is all you see. Leave Eden with mine. Caesar, stop me.
Well played.
Well, this disease is defined by its treatment. You people make me sick. Balance of imbalance can be
Wow.
challenged. If there's such a Xanax, it's just theoretical. Prints your fingers in a Rorschach cheeks. So say you saw a treasure map.
Oh, we got some finger drums over there.
Psychiatric supply while we tragically try to fit into a tent. But who'd wanna be human anyway? Who pilots all these crude machines? Why'd you come into this world or come out that way? Like freaks of nurture. Well, isn't it funny? Funny, but you know, funny. 'Cause I don't think you want even if you could change. I think it makes you special, but it makes you strange.
miles and you the red hot sky. And if you're believers, then why would you grieve for the dead instead of a devil that you never pray for? You become immune to my toxic fumes, my those dependent presence in your life. It's all subjective, all due respect to the collective mind, but too weird to love, too scared to die, too alien to take you home.
And it's kind of a straight up punk section.
Horrified at the sight of my reflection in your eyes. I don't belong there. Well, it's illusions that make mind illusions, so I make you sing. You can thank me later. Well, I just think you would
The little sidebars at the end of each of these choruses is a nice touch.
Spat out a butterfly and said, 5 more minutes, please. You wouldn't believe the dream I just had. I mean, you were there, and you were there, and you, and you, and you were there. Cause I knew that you are even if you could change the things that make you special, now I make you strange. I knew that you are even if you could change the things that make you special are the same that make you. I know that you are even if you could change the things that make you special are the makes you strange. I know that you are even if you could change the things that make you special are the same that make you strange.
Oh, I've been muted this whole time. Anyways, Better Than the Alternative is a song that slowly builds over time, hits a high point, brings it back down to an isolating, I think just piano and vocals for probably a bit of a revelation there. Outliars and Hyppocrates is an interesting title because Outliars is spelled wrong. We're not talking about things that sit outside of a bound, even though we probably are, given that we're looking at normalcy and strangeness, to use a word that is used in the track itself. It's spelled with an A, like people who lie, maybe outwardly lie, outliers. And I kind of read this as outliers and Hypocrites is where my mind wants to go, not Hippocrates. And so I'm not quite sure what we're trying to go on here, although to be completely honest, some of these titles just go completely over my head anyways. There's definitely some sort of reference present that I'm not getting. I'm still curious about this fun fact about apples. This one returns to a bit of just the fun vibes that we had in tracks 2 and 3, being a bit more of that dark cabaret sound, jazzy with a little bit of darkness to it, and just fun, explosive energy at all points in this track. We had those sidebars after the choruses that I thought were interesting and comical. We had, what was it, the trombone, I think, at the beginning gave us a bit of a, I don't remember what sound it was, but I mimicked it because I thought it was funny. And then, in the chorus, he says something that I think is supposed to be negative of some sort. And then we have the background vocals going, ay, ay, ay. There's like these little flourishes everywhere that add so much to the track in a way that I continue to find myself asking if I should begin to look at my music in a similar way. It's almost as if, from my perspective, that after writing a section, right, you write your drum pattern, you write your chord progression, whatever rhythmic riff you're going to have on top of that, more foundational, maybe you have a guitar riff under it all, right? And then you write your melody on top, and you have your verse. And you can just copy paste it a couple of times for your entire verse section, and you can copy paste it into your verse too. But it's almost like at this point, Will says, what's missing? Let me look at the words I'm saying. Let me see if I can have any flourishes that play off of that. Let me listen to what the guitar is doing. Maybe there's space in there for something to be. And it's like after creating the bones of a section, he begins to add the flourishes, and the flourishes aren't even things that can be copy pasted anywhere. They are literally one-time ideas that work well against what is happening right here. Maybe there is a small modification that creates a variation the second time we hit this idea. Maybe the vocal line is completely different. I kind of get the feeling that most of these melody lines for the vocals are different from verse to verse, because the lyrics themselves, the rhythmic flow of them, do change so frequently. It often feels like the melody is written to match the poetry. And if you have different rhythmic ideas, you might as well change up the melody while you're at it, in which case you have different pauses and phrases and harmonies. And, well, that's ripe for adding new ornamental ideas to the second time you hit this verse. I think the only thing that ever feels static to me are the choruses. But this track, I don't know, it just really stood out to me as having a lot of these little moments that, these little ornaments tossed on that I found interesting. They add character, not just to the track itself, but moment to moment, there's something interesting going on. Some way to punctuate an idea that is outside of just the idea itself. It's very cool. I don't know how many more times we're going to take a break to take a break to talk about the music. I find that my comments are becoming repetitious. I talk about how infectious and moving and passionate and charismatic the vocals are. I talk about how bouncy and energetic the music is. I talk about how I'm loving the jazz and the chord progressions. And even at this point, while the first few tracks seem to have different influences to them, doo-wop and jazz and uh, man, what was the third one? I don't remember now. Oh, samba. I find that we've begun to repeat these hits more frequently now, and it's becoming less about what's the new influence, but where are we going with this one? Not necessarily something brand new, but something we've explored before, and both of these tracks I feel fit within that. Now, we still have 4 more tracks to go. Welcome to introduce as many new concepts as they'd like there, but I don't know, I think we've heard the sound of the album by now. especially since we've started to repeat ideas. And so I'm kind of running out of topics to talk about. A lot of the songs are a bit similar, as I explored earlier, and now we're beginning to explore similar foundational ideas as well. So I'm going to have some lyrics on these two, and then we're going to proceed on. This is a heartbreaking song. And I mean, most of them kind of have been, if you can get in on that side of the emotion, especially given the hysterical delivery of some lines, especially in the more personal tracks. This one is about kind of getting mentally messed up by your childhood and having a child of your own and kind of hoping that they'll fix you or at least make you feel normal. A lot of the verses are or feel like they allude back to another time. A time when everyone was tough. A time when you just got sick. You just went out and played with kids and got sick, and that's how you became a stronger person. A time of pink lemonade on autumn bomber coats. But it's all said with an air of disdain for it. How the past affects the present and creates us today. The chorus then speaks, it seems, from the narrator to their daughter, as was mentioned in verse 2, but my daughter's growing up. She's going to be a lot like me, but I don't want to be at all like me. It says, baby, could you play along with me? Would that be all right? And when we find out what's wrong with me, could you tell me how I'm right for you? I'm not okay, but I hope that I'm okay enough to be your parent and that there isn't generational trauma that I'm going to pass on to you. While this is neutral, I'd say emotionally, at the beginning and middle of the track, we do hit a point towards the bridge when he begins to just completely lose it. Complaining that everybody's up in his business. And we revisit a few lines that we had earlier. He says, but everybody knows that nobody knows, that everybody's in on everybody's business. This isn't my first Christmas. I know mistletoe and I see it. The mistletoe line is interesting but not too important to what I'm getting at, so I'm not going to dive into it. Later on he says, everybody knows that nobody knows, that everybody's all up in my business. This isn't my first anything. He repeats it. This isn't my first anything. Everybody knows that everyone is up in everyone's business. This isn't my first lyric. I know exactly how I should finish it. We go back into the chorus. Can you play along with me? Would that be all right? And we find out what's wrong with me. Could you tell me how I'm right for you? Could you play along with me? Would that be all right? After all that's been done to me, could you tell me how? Could you tell me how? Could you tell me how? Never finishes the idea. Says, what's so wrong about what's wrong with me? I'm just trying to do what's right by you. After all that's been done for me. After all that's been done to me. Could you tell me how? Presumably, I think, could you tell me how I can be the role model, the parent you need? But of course, you can't put that weight on a child. It is a heavy song about somebody who is not confident in their abilities to raise a child, but find themselves in the position regardless, knowing what was done to them, knowing how it affects their decision making, how it affects their choices, and wanting to do better by someone else, but not knowing that they will. That is a very heavy song for, of course, the music that's going on here. I have no idea how this dude delivers lyrics like these in the inflection that he does, how he doesn't have an emotional breakdown. It's like a total detachment from the words. He just says them because that's the performance. He can't feel them. And that's not to say that he can't, but that he doesn't allow himself to while performing, because otherwise, I mean, I'd be a mess if I had to sing any of this. Especially, well, I was going to say especially night after night, but I think that kind of hits the routine section. It makes it easier to dissociate from them. I don't know. Moving on to the next set of lyrics. This is probably going to be my quickest lyric dive yet. Outliars and Hyppocrates, a fun fact about apples, is literally just about being on the outside of the norm and enjoying it. Being a little strange, being a little odd, but owning it. The chorus is fairly straightforward. I doubt that you would even change it if you can. You think it makes you special, but it makes you strange. I doubt that you would, even if you could, change. The things that make you special are the things that make you strange. It's the idea that being outside the norm, being different, being unique is a good thing. And so much of the verses here and the pre-choruses are about sort of oddities about this character that they absolutely own. You know, at the end saying, I won't even change it. Yeah, they're a bit strange, but it's what makes me me, and I'm happy to be me. Pretty straightforward song, and, you know, as usual, I urge you to check out the lyrics if you're interested in them, because there are some really neat lines in there. Next up, we're going to check out BlackBoxWarrior, OKULTRA, which is, I think it has a little play off of MKUltra, the CIA thing. But OKUltra just sounds, it just sounds like a 90s thing. Like, hey, how you doing? OKUltra. Just kind of edgy, but also working in the idea of just being okay. I don't know. Let's hit it. See what's going on here. Ooh. That's a fun starting line.
Well, he collapsed with Stevens-Johnson syndrome on the ER floor. Panic attack, anaphylactic, and ataxic. Well, the way he spun his butterfly wrist all six, his phalanges rubbing candles at both ends and his synapses. And the method with which he recycled his humans, Trojan horse, his blood-brain barrier, and raised the LD50, yes, yes. And threw flat off by revelation, shame the black box warrior. He skipped this town and headed straight down his street. Shows himself from reason in a Kevlar baby blue tuxedo, built it from the finest fibers, flesh and fiberglass and flowers, ego, a mosquito, evil incarnate, good incognito, pops placebos for libido, screaming bless the torpedoes for what? For what? For what it's worth. If it was gonna kill you, boy, it would have by now. For what, for what, for what it's worth. There's no more looking back, it's looking up or looking down.
It's a really fun jam. The offbeat accents keeps it light and bouncy.
He was wearing stolen rubber shoes and wrapped poison ivy noose around his lotus jugular when they came. They found him with a map to every victim.
The upright basses in this one sound so good. I thought that was tremolo picking, but I think those are 16ths. Very precise.
If it was gonna kill you, boy, it would have by now. For what, for what, for what it's worth. There's no more looking back, it's looking up or looking down.
The impending danger on the piano.
Did you have xenon orchid sinews spilling down the outer center of your blooming Escher Mandelbrot head? And how about claustrophilic tendrils clapping caskets closed on seven-knuckle dumps? Did you get along well with the Gideon bugler pineal glands, your projector eyes casting sci-fi through your STR strands? Tell me about your nerves to steal from under Bacchus' bloody nose. Did the Vivian Nimbus tie-dye you and your ears pierced with a English gauge flagpole? Did you die before your day? Thursday traction, Tuesday titration. My hope is to assess through my objective report of your subjective conjecture whether this proprietary blend of expertise and seasoning works as well as this transorbital ice kick. Ballistics got a better idea. This is about the best we can come up with. What do you think ideas spread because they're good? No, they spread because people like them. So here we are once again, holding as it were a mirror up to your mirror. Because it's just something people do. A bloody knife has split your infrastructure. Why'd you have your motor function coin on that?
Well, that was a bit of a diversion.
Well, you may line your animus, karate chop your abacus, and learn to be an animal instead. But I never think you're better than this. Your modus operandi causes Nazi Scotism and suicide. Why did I know self be true when it is you are the problem, not the things you do, but something sick inside. Living on the dialectics, boy, you really is defective. CBT don't seem effective for the cluster B accepted. Offer up your innocence. Please ignore the side effects. You've lost your mind and almost lost your life before, so you'll be fine. For what? For what? For what it's worth. If it was gonna kill you, boy, it would have by now. For what? For what? For what it's worth. There's no more looking back. And why would you want to look back? I mean, it's no good looking back, so time to look forward now. For what? For what?
Straight up musical theater inspiration with that.
They would have by now. For what? For what? For what it's worth. There's no more looking back. It's looking up or looking down.
Alright, we're gonna keep it rolling. Thank you for the dialectics, but I need you to leave. Also, the double K in Thankk. Okay.
They could prescribe you any illness you like if you
Just as soon we leave that sounds.
You could sing a pretty melody like a black canary, but a crow don't know the smell of carbon monoxide. How many years have you been on that couch?
You know what his vocals remind me of? Lounge singers.
Draw a line in the sand where it ends and you begin, but the tide rolls in, so who knows? Oh well, and a little I did, and he never hurt nobody. But lately you've been focusing too much on yourself. So how many milligrams of you are still left in there? Well, 'cause back in my day we didn't need no feel-good pills and no psychiatrists. No, we just drank ourselves to death. God damn it.
This is going to be fun to get into lyrically. So we don't, back in my day, we didn't have bills or psychiatrists, we just drank ourselves to death.
What's a flaw? Can it be both? Well, I suppose that's an answer. Would you give up your humanity for just a touch of sanity? Cause God knows it's not like it's cancer. And good news to the purest, they discovered a cure for the symptoms of being alive. It's a painless procedure with a low rate of failure, but very few patients survive. A little conformity never hurt nobody, but lately I've been worried that you're losing
Oh, that was
yourself.
good.
So how many milligrams of you are still left in there? Well, 'cause back in my day we didn't need no feel-good pills and no psychiatry.
Yeah, this is a straight up rock opera where the guitar work is piano and glockenspiel. Interesting decision. So we finally get to explore the idea we heard at the beginning. Yeah, very Renaissance style. What?
Doctor, what's my prognosis if the studies show that diseases in the eye of the beholder? Tell me so it goes. We depress
Oh
to
my
repress,
God.
I guess, in layer after layer to get off our chest. It's cold out now, we can take it off later. Better safe than sorry, and we both know the danger. So, doctor, could you run another test? Got a feeling that this time I might just pass it. Well, if you raise the average, well, I'll sing when the bell curve rings. And lyrics symptomatic of the way we think. And our harmonies don't sink, we can change our voices. A chorus on condition of a diagnosis. So back in my day, we didn't need no feel-good pills and no psychiatrist. What can I say except don't need no evil wills? Moral nihilists. I said back in the days of lobotomies and shot that being mad scientists. Oh, don't you make
So much
me
power.
erase my breath. God damn it! Ain't your identity at stake? Does aspirin kill you with the pain? You're not your thoughts, you're not your brain. You're just the character you've made. Up in your head, down in your heart. What seem like separate body parts come together to believe they're you and not just chemistry. It's not the way that you were raised or what the advertisements say. Not what you pay for or what you pray for, what you want or what you say. And I see your tendency to redefine disease by what you need. And I'm afraid I can't prescribe the diagnosis that you seek. And something tells me that you need. Forgive me now if I misspeak, but something tells me that you like, and something tells me you prefer to be sitting there flipping through those old issues of People. Well, that's our time. See you next week.
Alright, I don't know if it's because I picked up more lyrics on this listen within the track. On both of these, actually, with BlackBoxWarrior and Marsha. These two tracks are fairly comedic. Not just in the lyrics themselves, but also in how the music works its way around, utilizing tropes in ways that are unexpected. Like that sultry sax coming in, I think it was the middle of this track, wasn't it? It's totally caught me off guard. But it's like, of course, that's what was going to happen. The music was very clearly going in that direction, but like lyrically, it kind of wasn't. And you're like, there's no way they're going to do this. And then they mix the two. Um, and it's just like, why didn't I see that coming? It so perfectly works, but it's kind of comical because it's a bit absurd as well. Um, and some of the lines in here are hilarious, and it's kind of thinking back on some of these tracks. I think comedy has always been here, but I just don't think it's been as overt on the surface. A lot of the comedy in the lyrics have been sort of tongue in cheek. And so while I was listening to this, I mentioned last track and a little bit of this track too. I get like a generic lounge singer kind of vibe from him. And at one point, Richard Cheese even crossed my mind for a second. But I think what's more accurate is Bo Burnham. Catchy songs that, for the most part, are fun to listen to with comedy laced throughout, but are carrying some heavy topics in the lyrics. When you actually dig into what they're talking about, it isn't light or bouncy or fun or energetic or comical at all. But I think even beyond that, there is a skill, I think, in balancing all of this. The playfulness of the music with the weight of the themes and finding lyrics that can sit in between those, where the lyrics are kind of bouncy and irreverent at times, but also if you listen to them as a whole, you certainly get the weight of the topics at hand. There is a ton of craft that goes into that. But I think also listen to the piano solos. Listen to the vocal work, the vocal variety. Listen to the range that we get in the vocals. Listen to, I've said the vocals a few times, but it is kind of Will's solo album. But certainly listen to the rest of the band. Check out what the auxiliary percussion dude's playing. Listen to the brass, the horns, the drummer. Everybody here is playing at such a high level that at some points, especially during the more comedic sections, it reaches a point where I'm like, these dudes are so talented, and this is what they choose to play. Both from a bit of like, oh my god, this is what they're choosing to play with their skill, but also like they have all this skill and they find ways to work it into music like this that is so effective at what it does. This album is the sarcastic, self demeaning, angsty music of like the 90s. Everything in here is dripping with sarcasm. Everything is chosen almost ironically in a lot of ways in order to achieve a sound that either is the exact opposite feeling of what the lyrics are talking about, or to evoke an idea of a place or time or era that the lyrics are criticizing. Maybe not even place and era, but idea. Everything is chosen not to support the lyrics directly, but in order to support them indirectly. And it's fascinating how he does it every time in different ways. I usually, when I talk about composition that I'm envious of, it's because of the sheer technicality of the work itself or the technicality in the performance. People just being skilled in traditional music creation ways. But I'm really envious of this dude's ability to connect so many different things in ways that seem like they have nothing to do with each other, but amplify every bit of the art. He sees connective tissue in all of the strangest places, but the end result is something so much more effective. And then, on top of that, his piano skill is just phenomenal and his compositions are great. Like, it's not even just that he's using his unique perspective to create odd music that's good. No, I mean, this is just fantastic music even without any of the lyrics, any of the themes. This is just really solid music. The layers are fantastic, the way things work together. We talked about the ornamental ideas, I think, in our last section, and how they change from section to section. Like, the composition is great. But then to use these sounds in a way that is counterintuitive, technically, in an ironic manner, to support the ideas that he's doing in the lyrics, it's not fair. Oh, man. The dude's just skilled in so many ways. And the more I listen to this, the more I realize I could never do anything like this. This is so far outside my realm. Primarily because I don't typically think about music in terms of lyrics and themes like that. So, like, the idea of creating music that so interestingly and ironically marries these two halves is something I don't think I'd ever get around to. But even when I do bring lyrics in, it's usually a bit more straightforward. Oh, and I mean, let's not even ignore the fact that the lyrics themselves are great poetically and linguistically. It all has phenomenal flow audibly when you listen to it, but also when you look at it on paper and you see all the different rhyme schemes and the rhythmic patterns and just all of it. The vocabulary strong. I mean, just Will's the total package. I guess we're going to get into the lyrics here for these two tracks, and then we'll wrap up the whole album. For BlackBoxWarrior, OKULTRA, I don't know. There's so many lines in this one, and I'm not quite sure what any of it means. The first two verses just seem to be stream of consciousness thought that speak about things quite objectively, describing events, which the idea of MK Ultra was to use, was it acid, I think, as mind control and or truth serum. So the idea of just, like, verse 1, well, he collapsed with Stevens-John syndrome on the ER floor, panic attacked, anaphylactic, and ataxic. When the way he spun his butterfly wrist all six, his phalanges, Roman candles at both ends, and his synapses, and the method was with which he recycled his humors. Trojan horsed his blood-brain barrier and raised the LD-50. Yes, yes, and through fight-or-flight revelation, shamed the black box warrior, he skipped this town and headed straight down history. It's very matter-of-fact description of events in a way that could be, could parallel the idea of a truth serum. But what any of it means, it just seems to be a stream of consciousness to me, and verse 2 is quite similar. The chorus just says, for what it's worth, if it was going to kill you, it would have done that by now. So there's no more looking back, it's only looking up or looking down. Are you going to take this as a positive or a negative? You can't change what happened, but you're not dead now, so what are you going to do with your life? Right? For what it's worth, I didn't kill you. Don't look on the past, just take this for whatever you want. Take this how you will. And so, I don't quite know what this is about. Then we get to the spoken interlude, which was just a phenomenal monologue full of so many tongue twisters. And I'll tell you, I don't understand most of it. Every 3 words has an annotation because it has some sort of obscure reference to some strange thing from the past. I don't know. But it's impressive just that he did this, and I'm sure he does this live too, which means he's got the whole thing down pat for one take demonstrations of it. Again, I don't know what this song is about though. Everything in the spoken interlude seems to be about a psychiatrist speaking to a patient, but how that ties into anything else we've explored on this track, I have no idea. Marsha, thank you for the dialectics, but I need you to leave. Seems to be a conversation between a person. Oh, no, not a conversation between. There is a perspective on mental illness from a new point of view. One that views it as an actual issue that people need to get checked up on, just like any other aspect of your health, vision, dental, medical, mental. Mental health is health. The chorus tends to float back to an older perspective of mental health in that it doesn't really exist. Says, you've been focusing too much on yourself. How many milligrams of you are actually still left in there? Because back in my day, we didn't need no feel-good pills and no psychiatrists. No, we just drank ourselves to death. And damn it, we liked it. This older, hardened perspective that mental health isn't a problem, you just aren't owning up to things. You're just not strong enough. You're a weak generation, that kind of vibe. That's what we hear repeatedly throughout the chorus. But the verse takes a more positive approach to it. It says they could prescribe you any illness you'd like if you could define the terms of your ailments. You could sing a pretty melody like a black canary, but a crow doesn't know the smell of carbon monoxide. I really like that line. All you have to do is tell us what's wrong with you and we'll fix you. But how are you supposed to know what's wrong with you? It says, how many years have you been on the couch? They could have quilted you in the throes by now. You draw a line in the sand where it ends and you begin, but the tide rolls in, so who knows? Oh well. I kind of like this because it showcases, I mean, obviously the old perspective here is done about in a sarcastic way. Obviously, this isn't the way to treat mental health, but it shows that even the new way of people spending years with counselors, with therapists, trying to figure out what's going wrong doesn't really work because we don't have a good way of getting into the mind. At best, we rely on what the person thinks is wrong with them, what they tell us about themselves, and if they don't know what the root issue is, how do you get to it? And that's part of the therapist's job. Some are better than others. But I could definitely see some people ending up spending years in therapy not feeling like they're getting any better because they don't know what to tell the therapist to give them the clue that they need to help them work through it. And even methods to work through pain or trauma or whatever your mental health issue is, it's not one size fits all. If you are a bit outside the bell curve, a bit unique. You might find that what works for everyone else doesn't work for you. So even if you can find the issue and have it recognized by your therapist, they still might not be able to help you specifically because they don't know the best method to do so. It can be exceptionally frustrating. And that seems to be what this track is about. And of course, by the end of it, we have a monologue that kind of dismisses everything. And the very last line is, well, that's our time. We'll see you next week. Nothing has been solved at this point, and you'll be back next week, and the cycle will continue. All right. I don't know how to really tie that one back to the music. Let's wrap this up. We have 2 tracks to go. One is almost 6 minutes. The other is just shy of 3. Looking at around 9 minutes together. And then we'll give some final thoughts, look at the last lyrics, and we'll be done with this one. Let's dive into Love Me Normally. Or sorry, Love Me Normally. It's already starting off a little bit sappy.
In lipstick on the mirror are the lyrics to my obituary. In iambic pentameter, follow perimeter, cross my eyes, dot my T's. I was delivered, holding scissors. I lived deliberately. I'm a quitter and a winner anyway. 'Cause I never agreed to participate in this game. Won't follow my dreams. No, they've all got me waking up screaming. I can let them go from me. After all, there's no I in team, and I'd rather be normal. You're so normal. I suggest that we keep this informal. 'Cause a normal.
Yeah, there had to be more of a ballady song on here somewhere, given the styles that he's emulating.
Well, I don't think life would be much worse than it is in
the finger snaps with the chimes sound so crisp. That is a phenomenal texture layer.
Or escapist to leave the quarantine when you're contagious. It may just be a cold. And besides,
oh, those aren't finger snaps, are they? That's a symbol.
I drank myself to death to be the afterlife party. When the after party came, I was rolling in my grave, and I'd rather be normal. You're so normal. I suggest that we keep this informal. 'Cause a normal human being wouldn't need to pretend to be normal, to be normal. Well, I guess that's the least that I owe ya. To be normal all the way, I couldn't be, yeah. Come on and love me normally. Now this is the part of the song I like to talk to my audience. I like to tell them there's something I want from you Hyppocrates tonight. I want you to look to your left, look to your right. You're 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, rock around the clock tonight. And I want you to find those points of no return, those singularities, those burning rings of fire on the beautiful pupils, on the beautiful eyes, the beautiful boy and girl. Neither both are in between that you rock with you tonight. And I want you to tell me how you really feel. I want you to love the way they so seamlessly, like a dream, so beautifully, oh so dutifully. Jam that square peg in the round hole in their heart. I want you to tell me that you love the way they don't stick out like sore middle fingers, that they crawl away at the side
Why were there 80s electro drums there? Really fun panning movement there.
Come on and love me normally.
Yeah, just a solid rock and roll ballad here. Big bombastic ending, lots of powerful vocal work. I'm curious where they're going to take this, because this feels like the big ending of the album, both musically and lyrically. This last track is only 2 and some change, so it's not very long. And there's all this silence. This track is Memento Mori, the most important thing in the world.
One day you'll look up at the ceiling above. If you're lucky, you'll be surrounded by the ones that you love. When the lights in your eyes fade and life flashes by, one day you're going to die. One day you'll sleep and you'll never wake
This
again.
100% does feel like a Richard Cheese track.
Nothing, no one knows how it ends. Rest in peace or pieces and won't even know why. One day you're going to die. Read your horoscopes, your palms and tarot cards, but either way your destination ain't very far. You could drown or choke or burn or be hit by a car. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but something will eventually. One day you'll look back at the life that you led. No more future left to fear, that you'll have the past to regret. But your worries will be over if you truly realize one day you're going to die. Take it away, hand.
Working the theme into the solo.
In the fabric of time and in the vastness of space, a billion amounts to nothing in infinity's face. At most a couple generations will remember the ways in which your life never mattered. So who cares if it's a waste? Well, one day you'll be not even a faint memory. No, and most it goes to fall and leave from your family tree. Your legacy's not yours to see, nor is your unity. And you'll never know what it all means. But you'll be at peace before you sleep if you just keep this in mind, that everything and everyone goes with the passage of time. So whether it's cancer, murder, or suicide, one day you're going to die. No need to fear those planets. Here you won't be alive. Try not to think about it. One day you're going to die, and there's probably nothing after. One day you're going to die. So if you only have one chance, you ought to try your best to live as you like. One day you're going to die.
Well, that was some morbid comedy to wrap that up. Just a nice little lounge track, preceded by the big rock and roll ballad coming in here. Once again, though, with these two tracks, really utilizing ideas, stereotypes that we associate with these genres, more so than making something brand new. And that kind of makes the whole collage thing kind of interesting. I will say that generally speaking, this entire album feels cohesive, but I think it's also interesting to note just how different many of these songs are, borrowing from genres and songs from totally different eras and styles of music. Through that lens, I think once again I just need to give a little bit more credit, as if I needed to praise Will's composition anymore. Give a little bit more credit to the writing here again, because not only do the songs work together in ways that honestly I don't know how he found the connective tissues on them, the whole album comes together into something that I think is very powerful. There's a lot of heavy topics on here that all sort of intertwine into this larger theme of identity and normality. And just humanity. I think if I remember correctly about the lyrics in Love Me Normally, the track is about kind of wanting to be normal. As much as a lot of these songs kind of spoke about wanting to exist outside of the norm, enjoying the second sight, and seeing beyond the illusion, understanding that being weird makes you unique and special, there's still that underlying want. Fitting in is addictive. Getting that validation is addictive. And so there's always going to be a part of you that wants to be normal, wants to have the white picket fence, to ignore the reality of things in favor of the comfort of conformity. It's easier, if nothing else. And so, I mean, that just creates a very heavy track there if I've picked up the lyrics right, which I'm kind of 50-50 on that one so far, I think. I mean, that is a way to end this album. And honestly, like I had mentioned, it is a big ending thematically. It is a big ending musically, going for the rock and roll ballad with the big ending, just bombast everywhere. Very bombastic, I think is what I meant to say. There's bombast everywhere. I don't think that's how you use that right. But instead, he chose to end it a bit more tongue in cheek, moving away from the seriousness of that one, and a happy comedic macabre track about how everyone's gonna die and there's nothing you can do about it. So, deal with that how you will. And that's literally what he says, you could die at any moment, right? A car could hit you, you could choke on something. He gave a couple of things. And at one point he's like, we're all gonna die, and in the background, sort of a call and response between lead vocals and background vocals, says us, but try not to think about it, because that can get crippling real fast. And just the absurdity, I think, of the phrase, live every life like your last. Well, I don't think he specifically meant this, but it's where my mind went. That phrase is supposed to be encouraging, to be the best you, But if I were to live every day like it was my last, I would constantly have death on my mind, and I don't think I'd get anything done because the crippling spiral I would fall down of realizing I could die tomorrow and everything that I haven't done, and what really does it mean to make the most of every second? At what point do I stop living in order to make the most out of life, in order to cement my place here? I think a lot of people end up missing out on their life as they chase their permanence through death. People want to be remembered, and they may chase that down and end up not actually living their life, hoping that they're remembered past it. Live every life like your last is, I'm sure it's encouraging, motivational for some, but not, I've never found it a very motivational phrase. And I think that Memento Mori, which of course means remember that we all die, this track specifically kind of leans into the absurdity of that and presents it in a comical way. But I think there's another purpose to it as well, which is just the general equalizer of it all. It's not just remember that you'll die one day, it's remember we all die one day. It is one of the few collective experiences all humans have. No matter how rich or normal or crazy or unique or odd or special you are, no matter what your life experience is, no matter what good or bad decisions you've made in your life, death comes for us all. And I suppose to some that might be a bit of a comfort, that regardless of how differently you get treated in life, you won't be treated any differently in death than anyone else. A really interesting way to end this album, but like I said, I think it kind of wraps up a lot of thoughts here, and it does so and delivers it in a bit of a comical way after hitting the high point of the identity and normality themes that have been present all throughout. I'm going to hit some lyrics on these two, and then we'll wrap this up. So I was semi-right about Love Me Normally. It is sort of a wish to be normal, but primarily in order to be loved. There is a running line throughout this track and some of the other tracks on the album that it is difficult to love somebody, or even borderline impossible to love somebody who is outside of the norms of society. They do not conform. So he says, I'd rather be normal. I suggest we keep this informal, because a normal human being wouldn't need to pretend to be normal. Well, I guess that's the least I owe you, to be normal in a way that I couldn't be. So come on and love me normally. It talks about, in the verses, sort of the ways that they're abnormal. So the chorus stands in opposition. It says, well, I'd rather be normal than what I am, how I describe myself in the verses, which leads to the drastic shift in the bridge, which tells people, he says, this is the part of the song where I like to talk to my audience. I like to tell them there's something I want from you hip cats tonight. I want you to look to your left, look to your right. You're 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, rock around the clock tonight, and I want you to find those points of no return, those singularities, those burning rings of fires, and the beautiful pupils of the beautiful eyes of the beautiful boy, girl, neither, both, or in between that you brought with you tonight, and I want you to tell them how you really feel. This idea to look around you in a bit of a manic description, kind of leaning into look to your left, look to the right. That type of stereotypical motivational speech kind of thing. He kind of takes it in a manic direction. He says, find that person though. I want you to tell them that you'll love the way that they so seamlessly, like a dreamfully, so beautifully, oh so dutifully jam that square peg in the round hole of your hearts. I want you to tell them that you love the way that they don't stick out, that they crawl their way up the bell curve, stick their flag right in the peak, and slide their way back down. That they're not maladaptive, not malcontent, not malignant or maleficent, but rather that you love them exactly the way that everybody else loves them. The idea that in the middle of this song, about saying, I'm not normal, but I kind of want to be, so that I can be loved, he tells the hypothetical audience to love the people around them normally, like everybody else sees them. I think it's a really interesting message because it is supposed to be absurd. Of course, usually people say that I love you for all the ways that you're unique. And so this kind of runs against that, which pokes the whole flaw in the chorus. Of course, this is how he feels. He feels that he's too weird to be loved, but I think it's a little reminder to himself in the most absurd way that people don't love people for their conformity. They tend to love them for how they're unique. And a reminder to himself that he can find love for who he is and that he doesn't need to be normal to find that. That's what I get out of the song anyways, and I like that. It's one of the few tracks that I feel isn't quite as universal. I don't really feel too much of a connection to it. I think it was made for him, from him. And while most of this album feels like it's definitely for Will in some capacity or another, this one feels exclusively for him. I think it is like I mentioned, a love letter reminder to himself that he doesn't need to change to find love. I didn't even need to really pull the lyrics up from Memento Mori. It's a very surface level track. There are some really nice lines in here, but for the most part it's about the fragility of life. Not even just the moment to moment, but even people who try to cement their legacy somehow. You know, they're the person who did this. Your achievements and advancements might help people in the long run, but will be forgotten. Which I think this is the most nihilistic and bleak part of it, but given that it's so tongue-in-cheek, I think is fine, because otherwise this is a ridiculously heavy passage for the album, which has ridiculously heavy passages in it. It says, in the fabric of time and in the vastness of space, a billion amounts to nothing in infinity's face. At most a couple generations will remember the ways in which your life never mattered, so who cares if it's a waste? But even the idea that if you did do something important, a few generations from now, your name won't even be remembered. Maybe you'll last a few generations. What about a millennia? What about 10 millennia? What about 1,000,000? What about 1,000,000,000 years? What about infinity? Somebody invented the wheel. No one knows who. Their contributions are still felt for sure. But they themselves, they've cemented no history to be remembered. They have a legacy, but nobody knows it's theirs. And that's what he's saying. Even if you're trying to cement a legacy, even if you're trying to be somebody who people remember, he says that's still kind of wasting your life. as I kind of mentioned earlier in the discussion, the idea of chasing remembrance through your death and wasting your life at that same time. He kind of hits on this as well, because people might remember you 10, 50, 100 years from now, but thousands, tens of thousands, millions, billions, you'll eventually be forgotten. I mean, what is it, the old adage? And this too shall change. Nothing is ever set in stone. It's really interesting to be on a journey as bleak and chaotic, depressive, heavy as this album was. And just to have the main memory of it be a rip-roaring good time. I certainly need another go around on this album. But it's not going to be anytime soon, because the next time I do it will be with lyrics in hand, and I think some of the emotional weight is going to hit me harder than it did this time. But not just that. Will Wood is on my radar now. I gotta check out his more recent albums, and I certainly need to dig into his older ones, but this right here cements him, even if everything else I hear from him completely bounces off me. I don't want anything to do with it. This album is in my top right now. It is so effective on every element. It achieves what it does in eclectic ways that honestly are better than if they had ever attempted to do anything in a more standard manner, which I think speaks to the idea of being unique is better than conforming. That just right there is baked into the musical identity of this album. But it's all done so effortlessly. And I think that's what just absolutely draws me to this. This is a 10 out of 10 album for me. Nothing in here I didn't like. There's nothing in here that I feel could have been done better. It is... I don't say this often, and I'm sure after a few listens I might drop this down, but it's a perfect album. This is perfect art. I don't believe in perfect art. I believe everything is flawed in some way, as art is created by flawed creatures. But on a first time listen, I find no flaws with it. Those are my thoughts on Will Wood's The Normal album. I was kind of curious about that album name at the beginning, but it makes perfect sense now that I've heard it. Dang, the more I think about this album, like the heavier things get. Ah, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. Thoughts, perspectives, opinions, any of that, down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, a link to my music, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. I'll be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. EST. We'll do a live stream. And then next week, we have a themeless week. We'll be exploring some of my picks, some special selections, some comment requests, some smaller bands, and some new music. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.